Along with being the past chair of CIQS, I'm also the CIQS trustee and general secretary of the ICMS. Along with hosting this 21st annual PAQS conference, we are proud that the official launch of the ICMS standard is happening here in Vancouver, Canada. I would like to now introduce to you Ken Creighton, President and Chair of ICMS, who will start our presentation to you all.
Thank you. My name is Ken Creighton. I'm the RICS trustee to the ICMS Coalition and chair of the coalition, and it is a great honor to be here today and to launch the standard that we've been working on for 2 years now. I want to talk a little bit about why we produced this standard and how we produced this standard and bring us up to where we are now before I hand over to some of the experts who will talk about the details of what's been accomplished. And the issue that we began with is really that we have a global marketplace. I think this room here today is an example of that. We have a global marketplace, but we have local standards. For many, many years, that served us well. We had wonderful infrastructure projects that were built with those standards, but now we have a situation where projects are truly international. And when you have a global marketplace and local standards, you have a bit of a challenge. So for example, what you're looking at now is a mock-up of a power station in the UK. It's funded by the Chinese. It's being run by the French, designed by the British. And it's an example of many projects today that are truly international. And so when we have local standards and an international market, we don't have the efficiency and risk reduction that we could have. And to be clear, when we talk about international, we're really talking about everywhere. I do a lot of work in different places around the world, and oftentimes I hear people use the word international, and what they mean with international is not here, right? They say, this is Vancouver. That international stuff is fantastic, but here in Tokyo or Sao Paulo or Brussels. And the question is, well, if international isn't here and here and here, where is it? Open up a globe of the world and show me where international is. International is everywhere. The marketplace doesn't stop at political borders and show its passport. We're all part of one truly international marketplace. Now, within this context, what is our role as professionals? Given the reality of an international marketplace, given the reality of local standards and this international marketplace, what is the role of us in this room? What is the role of professionals? Well, I think that comes down to leadership and the basis of the project that we're talking about today. If not us, who? If the professionals aren't going to lead, who will? If we're not going to ensure that we deliver value and consistency through having consistent standards, who will? And that is really the basis of the idea of saying, let's work together and create a shared standard. The photograph you're looking at was taken at the International Monetary Fund, the IMF in Washington, D.C. We gathered as a coalition in June of 2015, so just over 2 years ago. And we spent 2 days. It was an honor to be hosted at such an esteemed organization, the IMF. And we spoke about how do we go about doing this? How do we go about the governance, the standard setting, the strategy, the process. How do organizations that aren't used to setting standards together, how do we deal with that? How do we deal with the intellectual property? How do we deal with issues of funding? And we had a successful meeting that ended in a round of applause. And we agreed on how we would set that up. Now, soon after that meeting, we went from 17 organizations in the room that day to then, when this picture was taken in London in November 2016, when we launched the consultation draft. So just this past November. And in that time, we did a few things. We set up an independent standard setting committee, and many people on that committee are here today. So actually, a few of them are going to speak in a moment, but can I just pause if members of the standard setting committee could stand up? We have a few members of the standard setting committee, if they could just pause. And so I just want to be clear that these are some of the 20+ individuals that have really done the work. So one of the ways, I think a key to the success of this project is that we separated the politics, if I can call it that, from the merit of setting a standard that is right for everyone, right for the world. And so the individuals on the standard setting committee do not represent an organization or a country or a sector or anything. They are working for the whole international marketplace. And so that allowed us, the trustees, to work together to allow them to do this work in a way that benefits us all. I mentioned, when this photograph was taken in November, we were 36 organizations, and today we're 46. And if I could just pause for a second, maybe representatives from these organizations could stand up quickly and be recognized. I know that a number of you are in this room. Come on, Creighton, yes, and Craig, and Justin, and Martin, thank you. And Grant, we have the Australians over here. We have so many people stand up. There are so many people here from organizations within the coalition. And so just to give you an idea here, we have China and Canada and the US, UK, France, Germany, Japan, Hong Kong, Australia, China, Brazil, every Sri Lanka, it just stood up, every region of the world. And I would go as far as to say that we're not aware of organizations in this space setting standards, professional organizations that aren't in this coalition. If you do know, thank you all. If you do know, let us know. Thank you. So a few of the guiding principles that have led us to where we are today, of how we've put this together. The first is that all 46 of the organization, all the people that just stood up and all the others that aren't in the room today but are here with us in spirit, we have worked truly collaboratively and equally. So we have terms of reference where we share the intellectual property. We work together. We have a shared private website where we share all of our information and documents. The standard that we're launching here today is legally owned by all of the organizations in the coalition, and we've agreed that it's free. So you can go to the website, the ICMS-coalition.org, and download the standards. So as a coalition, we own the intellectual property, so we can ensure that it is what it is and all the rest. And it's free. It's a gift to the world. As I mentioned, the standards are set by independent experts. A few of them just stood up. And the other point I want to make is going forward, and I know the panel that's about to speak will get into this, is that setting the standard, what we're celebrating today, is a real accomplishment. And I know a lot of people in this room have really been looking forward to this day. I know that I have. But in a lot of ways, the work begins. Because if we're back next year and this is on a bunch of bookshelves collecting dust, we're in big trouble. We need to get this adopted. And that's something that I hope everybody in the room thinks about. So the companies, the firms, the governments that can benefit from consistency in cost comparison in infrastructure can ensure that they know about this, they ask for it to receive the benefits of it. We need to get this out into the marketplace. So with that, I'd like to hand over to Silian Ong, who, based in Malaysia, who is the chair of the standard setting committee that I mentioned. And Silian Ong has done the absolute magic trick of bringing all these experts together, working virtually, to produce this content. So if I could, Silian, thank you.
Hi everyone and good afternoon. My name is Ong Silian. As Ken said, I'm the chair of the Standard Setting Committee. We have gone through a tremendous and incredible journey over the last 20 months. Since October 2015, when we were appointed to be on the Standard Setting Committee. And to arrive at what it is today is indeed a historic moment, not for a few of us, but I think from the entire profession as well as for the construction industry. ICMS will be a game changer for the industry and will transform the way we measure and present construction costs across the globe. It will provide a single and international method of reporting of construction costs. It will make it easier for us to present a reliable price tag for all construction projects consistently across the globe. It will also provide a clarity in terms of definition of construction costs, what it entails, what it does not. This afternoon, I'm going to share this platform with my deputy chairman, Alan Muse. Alan is going to share a little bit more in detail with the framework on the standard, while I will share a little bit more on the process and the need for the standard. Why are standards so important? We know that what is and what is not included in the construction cost is very important for investors, for clients. And especially, as Ken described early on, when construction projects or real estate investment or property investment has become truly international, both in terms of client and also all the stakeholders involved in the industry itself. And so we need to have a consistent method of measuring and also to present the budget for cost control and ultimately to present the ultimate capital costs for the project. And truly from the investor's point of view, you need to know value, the worth of the investment and the return on investment. And you need to have a common basis upon which measurement can be made for that assessment or analysis of the return on investment. Increasingly, we find that clients who have investment in different parts of the world would like to benchmark similar type of projects across the globe for their investment. We think of hotels, for example. We think of even some of the retail chains that are going across the globe. And governments today would also like to benchmark some of their infrastructure development, comparing with what other countries are doing. And so the benchmarking is becoming important, but without a consistent framework or template upon which what constitutes construction costs, you can't really compare apple with apple. At the national level, we find that we need to report on the construction output and what construction industry contributes towards the GDP. And we also find that there is a discrepancy today where the percentage of contribution from construction towards the national GDP are not measured on a consistent way. And with the ICMS, we believe it will help to provide a consistent and accurate measurement of the contribution of construction industry towards the GDP. And these are some of the familiar illustration of what will contribute to an inconsistent presentation of costs. We find some of the infra projects in the past, we have variance from what was budgeted to what was actual. Because at the time when they prepared the budget, there was no template to help them to include what was to be included. And hence, for some budget, may have missed out certain important items in the cost budget. And so we find that in many situations, cost overrun or budget overrun has been a familiar scenario happening all across the globe. Not only that, we find that without a consistent and accurate way of measuring costs, contracts always end up in great disputes. We find documentation of contracts are often miss out a number of issues or items which are not captured or which are assumed to be borne by the contractor or by the employer. And that's why we find that in many situations, and this slide just represents across the world region, between 2010 and 2014, there have been great amount of construction dispute that incur great amount of costs as well as very time consuming. And these are negative impacts towards the industry, and it is not helping in creating a healthy environment for the industry. And clearly we find that construction disputes are both costly and time-consuming, and not only that, it will create animosity, adversary between the players in industry. We can do much better by creating a healthy environment, a more amicable environment where everybody will understand what they are responsible for. And I believe ICMS will bring clarity to the construction contracts, and hopefully will create a more healthy environment for the industry so that we can channel some of our valuable resources to more productive engagements. How are standards being used today? I know that many of us come from different countries. We represent our own professional institutions that we are proud of, and we always say we have our own standards. But truly, do we have an international standard where everybody can agree on? Depending on where we are, projects are often described in all of the following ways, whether it includes labor and materials, whether it includes land, whether it includes professional fees, or some other client's costs like advertising or legal fees, and so on and so forth. And so clearly, across the world, we have standards, but they're all at variance. They don't speak with one another. And that's why we need the ICMS. We need ICMS to bring solution to the problems that we face today. I remember when about 3 years ago at the PAQS board meeting in Hong Kong, we shared this concept of ICMS, and many people were skeptical. Now, how can we really bring all these ideas together? Can we truly have an international standard that we all can embrace? I'm proud to say that 3 years later from that meeting, before we even formalized the coalition in Washington in 2015, we are able to present today a standard where we have found everyone around the globe has subscribed to and will agree upon. And so what are the aims of ICMS? We hope to bring consistency and transparency for the construction costs, the way we present it, and so that we can benchmark, we can compare apple on the apple basis. It will cause we can then identify, when we present, obviously we recognize that in terms of cost, certain jurisdiction would have a difference. For example, in Hong Kong, the capital cost will represent only 20% of the total investment on the project, whereas land costs will contribute about 80% towards the total investment on the project. Whereas in the countries like Malaysia, our contribution on the capital cost will be 80% to the total investment. And land costs will only take 20% of the total investment. So there is a variance. But with the template, at least we can identify what are the elements that cause the difference. And we can give a story, we can give an analysis, we can explain to our client when they invest in a certain country. And so with a proper informed decision, and the client will be able to make informed decisions. And that's why in ICMS, we present a template, a cost where we can know what caused the difference. That's why in the first part of the standard, we have the project attributes. The project attributes would identify what are the causes in terms of design, the complexity of the design, the location, the timing, and the methodology in which the contract has been led or has been, contractors have been appointed. So the project attributes play an important part in arriving at the estimated cost. And with that data that's been collected, we can then use that confidently for project financing. Investors and financiers will look at the set of biddings required for the project, and they could look at it with confidence and to say that, yes, I can agree. Currently, there are issues pertaining to approval of funds requests from the different owners. And so this is what ICMS will help to achieve. And in fact, we were fortunate to have the support of IMF, the World Bank, even the European Commission itself. And who will benefit from ICMS? Indeed, everyone. Everyone who's involved in development projects. Involve the governments who will benefit from a clarity and certainty in terms of the funding required, in terms of budgeting for the projects. It will help owners, it will help consultants, it will help all stakeholders, and ultimately taxpayers. The public itself will benefit because you are going to create value for money for the industry. And if I may say, it will eliminate some of the gray practices around the world today. And I would not mention what it is, you know what I mean. And so with that, we can create a far more better things to do. I'm going now to hand over this time to Ellen, but I just once again reiterate the contributions by all my members in the standard setting committee. We started with 27, but along the line, a couple have dropped out because of other commitments. We now have 23 active members in the collusion and in the standard setting committee. And what we are currently doing in the course of next 12 to 18 months, our main focus will be to help the industry to embrace, to adopt the standard. And we will be ready to stand by to answer any queries or questions required by all the practitioners, by institutions who will help to implement the standards going forward. So over to you, Ellen.
Thank you very much, Celia-Ann. Well, Celia-Ann and Ken have laid out the vision for ICMS. I want to talk a little bit now about some of the practical implementation issues in terms of putting the standard into practice as a practitioner in our respective markets and different economies around the world. And just a point in terms of the SSC that Celia-Ann's already described. When we analysed the SSC experience, it was representing 16 countries in 47 different markets. And I think no one can claim that ICMS does not represent the true world of quantity surveying. So one of the things that struck me about the conference here is that it's obviously the interface of construction economics and green issues, green buildings, the more sustainable agenda, if you like. And one of the things that is key in terms of those informed decisions that clients need to make about such matters is actually data. And we've heard about the term big data. And big data is going to be very important for the quantity surveying profession in the future, and the cost engineering profession, and the cost management profession, to name three of the different terms we use around the world, because big data will allow us to make better decisions about not only green issues, but as Celia Ann's already alluded to, capital cost versus life cycle cost, etc. So, in terms of what will the standard cover and how it will be used and who will use it, I think one of the issues with ICMS is that it's a unifying standard for the profession of quantity surveying. So I've already described three names that are in use for quantity surveying around the world. And one of the reasons that that's confusing to clients in terms of the financial management of construction projects is because we have no common universal standards in our different markets around the world. So any client that is looking to embark upon an international program of work finds it a very confusing picture. So as well as the technical benefits of ICMS, one of the things it does is unify, as a first step, some of the terminologies and issues in our different spheres of quantity surveying or financial management of construction or cost engineering, or call it what you want around the world in buildings and civil engineering. So ICMS took the decision, the standard setting committee took the decision at day one to cover both the buildings and civil engineering sectors. And that immediately created a problem. The problem is that there's no standard classification in civil engineering in different markets even around the world. And certainly there is in buildings, and we researched that thoroughly in terms of all the different professional institutions in this room, or most of them have their own building cost classifications, but actually connecting the two, even in the UK, where I come from, is very difficult. So the first decision taken by the SSC was that we must bridge buildings and civil engineering and comprise one high-level standard which we can build on in a pyramidal data hierarchy way once we've got that first step in place. And I think the other slightly misleading thing I must say about ICMS sometimes when you're speaking to quantity surveyors around the world is that it's not a granular measurement standard. So the RICS, of which I'm a member, have produced standard methods of measurements as of CIQS, AIQS, etc. This is not a detailed method of measurement. This is a high-level cost classification that's used for cost benchmarking, but it can also be used as a reporting system at each stage of the project. So it can be used certainly in terms of cost prediction, it can be used in terms of procurement, and it can be used in terms of forensics, i.e. at the end of the project, recording construction cost. So it can be used at any stage in the project life cycle, but it's not a detailed method of measurement, and that's certainly something that needs to be clarified from the start. So what have we ended up with then? We've ended up with a four-level classification system, where the first level is actually the key component type, if you like, of the entity or the type of construction that we're undertaking. And the reason we kept this in those kind of boxes and we didn't separate out building types, for example, was that most international projects actually comprise a combination of both civil engineering and buildings. And most projects comprise roads, rails, buildings. Even the railway comprises buildings as well. So at this level, you're choosing the basic characteristics of the scheme. And rather than put those in terms of a box and call it buildings or civil engineering and start dividing between those two sectors, we decided it was better to actually make the division in terms of the key components at this first level. And that means that you can nest projects within each other as well. So you can build up projects based upon these components. The next level is basically an element with a small c, or a cost component, which is built up of what you would normally comprise the normal things in a building or an asset, such as the structure, the superstructure, the architectural works, etc., the services and the finishings, all of which quantity surveyors are generally familiar with. But one key issue, again, that the Standard Setting Committee came across with when they did their research around the world was that actually, if we're going to bridge buildings and civil engineering, we need to do something different from what we've done before, certainly in terms of the building lens, which has tended to be elemental with a large C in terms of elemental cost planning. So we weren't going to achieve that bridge between buildings and civil engineering if we had an elemental cost planning system. So we went for what we've called cost categories and cost groups. Those third level items, which are the cost groups, are actually a reasonably detailed way also of identifying, as Celia said earlier, what's included and what's excluded from a construction cost. Because our research had shown that what comprises construction cost varies around the world. So client costs and associated costs related to construction are either included or excluded. What ICMS does is make it crystal clear what is included or excluded in that debate. So clients and others know with some degree of clarity exactly what's included in that term construction cost. And the fourth level is actually a series of examples which are discretionary. They're not mandatory, because we recognise that quantity surveyors need some help in terms of determining what those typical items might be in terms of each item at the higher level, level 3. So we've included in the appendices to the standard a series of examples, and that also allows a degree of mapping between ICMS and local, more detailed national standards. And I think with the way technology is going in terms of BIM and structured databases, that mapping can be undertaken relatively painlessly in each national market. So there is a choice between reporting simply on your national standard or dual reporting using ICMS, at least initially. But we envisage, of course, that ICMS will become the standard in the future. As Celia also mentioned, there is a series of project values and attributes which describe the costs, because as any quantity surveyor knows, the costs are fairly useless without having some basic parameters about what the costs cover. So the project values and attributes cover the key cost drivers for each of those initial level 1 components for buildings such as the gross floor area, for bridges such as the span, etc. The key project quantities for each element are required to be provided. And these are actually stipulated in a binary sense. What I mean by that is that we give a series of limited options for each choice, so that when we collect the data in a database, we can interrogate it on that basis that's known, rather than an endless possibility of different options for each component. So how will the standard be used? Well, as I've said, it can be used for reporting and presenting costs at each stage in the project's life cycle, but we've listed down there what we think are the most common uses of the standard in terms of cost reporting, data collection, auditing, even dispute resolution, because we're aware, if you're involved in dispute resolution, that it's quite often useful to compare project performance, cost performance on one project with another project, and it's even more useful to compare it on an international basis sometimes. So it can be used for, as I said before, prediction, control, or forensics in terms of quantity surveying. And I think there's another point here about connecting it to the burgeoning and developing digital world of construction. I think we all know that building information modeling is going to make great strides in the future, and certainly is developing around the world. The reason that ICMS helps there is because it's been designed with a digital end in mind in terms of the options that you choose. So BIM models, providing the software vendors take it up, and we've already been inundated with requests from software vendors to look at ICMS. If they take this up in the way that we envisage, then clearly estimates from BIM models can be generated using ICMS, and more critically, we can collect the data in a form that is useful not only for designers but also for quantity surveyors. And that's the other key point about ICMS in that sense, because the structure that's been chosen actually aligns quite closely to design, i.e. it's structural, it's architectural, it's services. It's actually a design-aligned classification as well as a cost-aligned classification. And one of the biggest problems with building information modeling around the world is that in most markets we've got different design classifications to cost classifications. So who will use it? Well, clearly we know that the coalition organisations will use it. We know that practitioners will use it. And very much in a bottom-up sense, as Ken said in his presentation, this was developed by the profession for the profession. So those practitioners are going to be absolutely key in having conversations with their engaged stakeholders and clients and supply chain to use ICMS. But also, because ICMS is a benchmarking standard, we believe that investors, financiers, and certainly those involved in trying to plug the private sector infrastructure gap that Celia-Ann mentioned are going to be very interested in this standard. And I'm going to show a slide in a minute that shows some of the business partners that have already signed up to ICMS. And one of the ones you'll notice is an organisation called the Global Infrastructure Hub, which was set up by the G20 to facilitate and encourage best practice in infrastructure around the world to try and plug that private sector investment gap. And that's the Global Infrastructure Hub. I'm very proud to say that they've already supported ICMS. So these are the partners that I've just been talking about. And in fact, this list is very truncated because we're already working with one of the executive secretary of the SSC, Jerry O'Sullivan, is already working with the Irish government, for example. I had a meeting last week with Turner and Townsend, who are down there, who are undertaking a commission for the UK government in terms of looking at comparison of costs across different infrastructure sectors. And so the UK government, the Department for Transport, are interested in ICMS as well. But I think you will agree that some of the people on this slide are the major construction cost consultants in terms of the global economy, and therefore to get their support before we've even published the standard is tremendous. And I'll tell you what, it's not just quantity surveyors either, because Arup, who most of you will know as an multidiscipline engineering company, undertake quantity surveying as well, but it's hardly their core business. But they told me quite straightforwardly that actually ICMS has come along at a great time for them, because they're considering putting in place a global cost management system across the different sectors with which they're involved. And they said that they will use ICMS to actually embed and create a system of cost management globally in their organisation. So where there is central control in terms of how these organisations operate, such as Arup, for example, they are going to use ICMS because ICMS creates a solution for them. So that's it, but really elaborating one point from Ken, I wanted to make a personal appeal as a quantity surveyor, because I think there's a possibility here, speaking to everyone in this room, that you will see the Standard Setting Committee as somebody who's gone away and done this project. Very good, but it's your project, it's not my project. Well, that's not true. We didn't do it for ourselves. We actually did it for you. But the adoption of ICMS depends on each and every one of you in this room as quantity surveyors to have the conversation with your clients, to have the conversation in the industry about this standard, because I think it is critical for the profession in the future. I want to now hand over to Art Moore, who is going to facilitate the panel debate. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and very pleased we have such a big group. We're a little sparse this morning. I have no idea why, but I assume it had something to do with the pub. But anyhow, I would like to invite my distinguished guests to come up, the panel guests, to come and set up here, and we'll get going here. And the plan is for the remainder of our time this afternoon, I have 9 questions to ask the panel, which I've changed, so they don't know what I'm going to ask now. And after that, I'm trying to hold on to 10 to 20 minutes at the end so we could invite questions from the floor, and you can direct them to any of our panel guests if you wish. But first, I think what we should do is introduce our panel guests, and they represent basically all parts of the construction field. And our first guest is John and McKendrick, and I would like him to speak about himself and what he's been doing the last few years, and so he can introduce himself. So go ahead, John.
My name is John McKendrick. I'm Executive Vice President. My name is John McKendrick, Executive Vice President of Infrastructure Ontario, mostly on buildings, but I've also done some civil work as well. We've been in business for 12 years. Probably one of Canada's largest buyers of construction services, and very interested in ICMS.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gareth David. I'm a Senior Estimator and Risk Manager for PCL Construction. I generally get involved in bidding on construction projects across various sectors, industrial, commercial, and I've trained as a QS, previously worked at Creighton, and I've been at PCL for the last 10 years.
Good afternoon. I'm Julie Christie Marquez de la Cruz. I'm the chair and founder of the Philippine Institute of Certified Quantity Surveyors, and I'm also the director of our Arcadis Global Excellence Center. And the PAQS is giving a full support on the ICMS.
Good afternoon. I'm Roy Howes. I was on the SSC committee, primarily focusing on the civil side. I represented CIQS, and my day job is as Director of Estimating in Fluor Canada. The civil side was also led by Emeritus Professor Malcolm Horner, who provided a lot of interesting dialogue through WebEx, and then we had some meetings in London during the course of 2016.
Okay, thank you very much. So I think we have an excellent panel here because we have a diverse range of perspectives. With public sector, a contractor, a practicing QS, and an engineering contracting company that's well known to take on major projects. So we'll get right to the questions, and this is the fun part because we all have different perspectives, obviously, and how we would eventually get this to happen across the world, and that's an amazing achievement if we can pull it off. Anyhow, first question to the panel is, how is the global construction industry today, and how is it changing? And I'd invite any of you to start off. Who would like to start? John?
Okay, so one thing we've noticed in second time. One thing we've noticed in Ontario, because we're putting out so many construction projects, there's a lot more interest internationally in our economy in Ontario. So we're getting a lot of Spanish, French, UK companies coming into Ontario in addition to the domestic companies. And the one thing we learned early on is when the international companies come in, they don't know the local market as well. And we found that, I hate to say it, sometimes they either bid too high or they bid too low. And sometimes they bid too low because they don't understand the local market, or they don't have a measurement standard across. And it's not good for us when they bid too low. It's not good for the industry when they bid too low because they don't understand the costs in the Ontario market. And when they do that, and you guys all know, if somebody bids too low on a project, you're setting yourself up for problems down the road. Either because people are going to try and introduce change orders, you're going to get into disputes or whatever. And so we think it's very important that they understand when they're coming in, they understand how you cost things in your particular market. And even though the market, as we say, people will argue it's a local market, no, it really is an international market, and people are coming in from all over the world, and it's important they get their cost estimates correct. It's not good for any of us if they don't make money and if the project goes over budget.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Julie?
The global construction industry is very vast. At Arcadis alone, we are operating in 350 offices in 40 countries, and we have worked and currently working on 25,000 projects in over 70 countries. And there is also a growing trend in the existence or creation of global excellence centers or the outsourcing centers catering to various regions in the whole world. And as more enter into the profession, there are greater risk and inconsistencies and uncertainty in cost, classification, and the reporting scheme in general. So ICMS standard is very important.
Similar to Ontario, BC has seen an uptick in the number of competitors coming from Europe who have challenges within the marketplace because they're unsure of how the market operates. But in addition to that, we're also seeing more and more owners who are international, from anything from commercial real estate developers to large multinational petrochemical companies, and ICMS would be a great place for them to have a benchmark for these projects, these large multi-billion jobs that they're going to be running.
Roy, would you like to add to this?
Yeah, one of the key ingredients in all our client discussions is the benchmarking. What is the cost of construction? And as most of you are aware, the clients sometimes don't believe what they're hearing. I think the idea of ICMS to create a standard will certainly assist us in that discussion on construction costs going forward.
Okay, thank you. The next question for the panel is to discuss is what are you seeing as some of the barriers that may inhibit private investment into the global infrastructure in the gap? Anybody want to start off with that? Roy?
One area that I think that's going to be a challenge, and in the slides it did address it, the concept of should cost. We talk about green energy, we talk about new technology, innovation. I think that our challenges going forward is technology that we don't have benchmarking on, and how are we going to capture that data in a articulate manner and compare it to conventional construction. I think that's one of our greatest challenges.
Thank you. Anybody else in the panel would like to add to that one, or should we move on to the next question? Okay, I'll take that as move on. How does the challenges of comparability hinder the sector, and how does it manifest in the relations to the particular project? John?
So I'm going to talk about things from the government perspective. You know, you guys are trying to create an international standard. We can't even develop a standard within our own organization. As bad as that sounds, you know, maybe I should start a bit higher than that. Within the provincial government, there are subunits within the province, like there are, you know, municipalities, there are school boards, there are colleges, universities, and we don't even have the same standards, you know, between them and between how we do it as Infrastructure Ontario, reporting to the Ministry of Infrastructure. Within the provincial government per se, between Crown agencies, we don't have the same standards. And so it becomes hard. Between ministries, we don't have the same standards. We are often getting in fights with the Ministry of Transportation about how to estimate the cost of a road or a transit system. And so, you know, we have our own homework to do internally. So anything that comes from an international perspective and then gets pushed down onto us, in my view, would be a welcome thing to have happen. And, you know, and then I guess the last part, even within Infrastructure Ontario, there is a direct delivery projects group versus my group, which is a P3, public-private partnership delivery unit. We still have different standards, but at least that we have more control over. So, you know, and as we go forward, we are increasingly having to make decisions about, do we go P3 or do we go traditional? And you need data to do that, and you need everybody to be starting from the same positions, you know, starting from apples to apples. And you know, so we're just trying to get our act together on that front. And we are being directly asked that question by the Ministry of Infrastructure now. And so there is a move afoot by our ministry, our parent ministry, to get us to standardize. And we think that that we've got a more comprehensive costing system and infrastructure in Ontario, but certainly I think we would be open to adopting a broader system, or one that was decided on by a third party, instead of, if we can't agree amongst ourselves between us and the Ministry of Transportation.
Thank you. Sounds like we got a converter here.
I'll kind of attack it from the underside. So, as I'm sure we're all aware, budgets don't often reflect the actual costs, and as owners and developers, as contractors, we're providing the actual cost of a project as we see it at that moment in time. And unless owners want to use the information we are able to provide, you won't be able to compare projects. Very often within North America, you provide one number to the owner with no breakdown. So a hospital could cost $100 million in one place, but you have no idea how that breaks out across its different elemental structures. So it becomes very hard to compare projects if owners aren't requesting breakdowns and analysis of the bids.
Comparability is a key parameter, one of the key parameters in construction cost information. So construction costs are compared across countries, and regardless of the regions one operates. So it's important that there is a consistent standard so you can compare like-for-like assessment. And investments are also compared across countries, and investors need a unified approach so that they can make a better evaluation of their options. So there are also, you cannot say that one investment is far better or has better return than the other, because you cannot compare apples with oranges. And this is also a challenge for audit standards.
Roy?
Thanks, Art. One of the challenges I face in discussions on benchmarking is that the client accuses us of capturing data points that serve our argument of convincing them that the costs are relevant. I think a standard will eliminate that argument, and it will help us to normalize the data. I think that's key to benchmarking in the future, is to make sure that we have a level playing field and we're all measuring against the same standard.
And Roy, and further on that, how do you think this would assist your organization, specifically in the oil and gas industry? Because Fluor is one of the leaders in that field.
Absolutely. I think that what we're finding in the industry is these cost overruns are they're hurting everybody, and I think that it's key that we address benchmarking at an early stage of design and development, so that we are providing solutions, providing lean and mean execution to our clients at an early stage. I think so many times we go ahead with a plan and we don't really know what the costs are until it's too late. If we have benchmarking that we use up front, we'll be able to provide some direction to that project and to that client's investment.
Thank you. Okay, question number 4, moving right along here, and this one is really directed at John. And it's, what is the policymaker's perspective on the impact of inconsistent cost analysis, and what is the public's interest and concern?
Well, you know, when the government gives you $1 billion for a road or for a hospital, it's supposed to be a good news story for them. It's not supposed to be a scandal. And so if you don't get your cost estimates right and the bid comes in at $1.2 billion or $1.4 billion, then you've gone from what was supposed to be a good news story to a bad news story. So it's very important that you get your cost estimates right up front so that the bid comes in under. And you know, if you're a general contractor and you're bidding, there's nothing worse than having someone tell you, you're over budget, let's do some value engineering now. You're getting the project off to a bad start right away. So if you can get, first of all, the bids to come in under budget, you do that by budgeting adequately. And if you're a contractor and if you show up to work on site and the conditions are as you believe them to be and as you expected them to be, you're going to have a smooth running project. If the conditions turn out to be different and your costs are going to be higher than expected, then you're going to have a problem project with lots of disputes in it. It's probably going to be late, it's probably going to be over budget. So that's the first thing, is you have to get your budgets right. Secondly, it's important, the government needs to know when they budget for it that you're not going to come in over budget and have a scandal there. So we believe very strongly in transparency. We believe actually at Infrastructure Ontario that we're practicing those best practices now. We listen to our quantity surveyors. We rely heavily on quantity surveyors. And so we think we would like to see others within the broader public sector adopt similar standards. And you know what? Maybe they don't want to adopt our standards, but maybe they'll adopt your standards at ICMS. And that way, at least we'd all be on a level playing field at that point. And I think it would be fair for everybody. And it would be fair for taxpayers because we would have transparency across the entire sector.
Thank you, John. Garth, would you like to put your spin on that? No? Anybody else? Okay, we'll move on. And very interested, John, that you listen to your quantity surveyors. I've wrote that down here now for future use. The next question is, how does the inconsistencies in cost measurement impact on the analysis of value for money, and why is benchmarking so important to the industry?
So I'm going to take another crack at that one. So value for money is a term we often use in public-private partnerships. And basically, if you want to boil it down, you know, at a very simple level, I think of it as people criticize P3s because they have private financing, but they transfer more risk. So you have to weigh against the cost of extra cost of private financing versus the transfer of risk you get. So I think one of the challenges will be going forward is to make sure that you can compare or have a common standard that adjusts for different models. So when you're comparing a stipulated sum project and the estimate on that versus a P3 estimate and being able to adjust for that. One of the things that we've found is under design build, the design build approach of a P3, we will often find the design builder will find a much more cost-effective way to design the project. So we'll actually get a discount to the price. When you as quantity surveyors are measuring the cost of a project, you don't know the final design for a design build project because it is still to be created. And so we believe in our own, actually a study done for us by another quantity surveyor, Altus. Sorry, Art, I had to mention that.
That's okay, I'll allow it this time.
But done by another quantity surveyor showed us, they looked at all of our projects and we gave them access to our data, and that we were typically getting a 12.5% discount on the price for a design build project because of the more cost-effective design. So that's one of the things that you'll have to look for as we go through and fine-tune the model going forward.
Okay. Gareth?
So I think the goal is always to make better decisions. And when you have a consistent information, it allows you to make the right decisions for the right reasons. Inconsistent approaches can lead to bad decisions, which lead to projects being under budgeted, which causes a whole host of problems, both at the owner level and at the general contractor level. And yeah, value for money, we need to deliver like a high quality building that meets the needs of our stakeholders, and we're much better able to do that if we have a consistent approach to the way we produce our budgets. We don't want to be skimping and cutting corners. We want to be able to deliver the project to the ownership team exactly how they envisioned it and on time.
One of the important services that are being offered by cost consultants or service providers, and one of the key requirements of developers is to benchmark their projects from any regions that they're working on. So benchmarking is an important tool because it gives the client the opportunity to revisit their design and devise a scheme to make a financially viable option. This also gives designers and architects opportunity to undertake value engineering, and the quantity surveyors and the owners can analyze the data for funding purposes from banks and financial institutions. So inconsistencies in standards will lead to a not so efficient benchmarking data, and this is inefficient. So as quantity surveyors, we do a should-cost model, and then we put a lot of factors in order to align into one standard. And further to that, we do a lot of data conversions from a local standard to a national standard, and this is inefficient, and it will cause expensive mistakes, and the procurement is affected, and what happens is there will be a project overrun, and the intended value for the project and the value for money is not achieved. Hence, the business plan is often compromised or fails.
I just, one extra point. Talking of value for money, we spend large amounts of money bidding on projects, putting budgets together, and it's a huge waste if you can't continue to use that information that you spend so long and so much money putting together. Some of these P3s rented a couple $1 million for putting together a proposal, and if you can't use that information, it is a waste, and there's no value to that in the future.
Roy?
Early on, Art questioned me about the oil and gas industry, and I'm also involved in the mining industry. One of the things that our clients are faced with nowadays is that they just cannot afford the cost overruns of the past. And they are challenging us to build a plant that would typically cost $1 billion for half that, $500 million. How do we do that? Well, if we have benchmarking that's reliable, we'll be able to do some value engineering up front to accomplish that lean and mean execution that they're asking for. These are not pie in the sky academic exercises. These are real. A lot of our clients are coming to us and they're saying we just cannot afford the costs of construction in the past. And so we challenge to face some of the requirements of our clients currently. And the only way to do that is to have a set of benchmarking that's reliable, and then we'll be able to assess the actual costs against the industry standards.
Thank you very much. The next question is, I'm going to get our panel to predict if the ICMS manual here was adopted worldwide, what do you think would happen?
I'll start with the negative view.
You grabbed that pretty fast.
Canada works on a master format basis, at least at the general contractor level, where the whole project is broken down into 50 cost divisions. It's how buildings are designed, it's how specifications are written, it's how all the estimates, at least at the general contractor level, are produced. It's an entrenched system. It's going to be a challenge to change that system unless we get buy-in from large multinational developers or federal or local government. It will be a challenge to change and adopt the ICMS.
So I'm going to take a more positive perspective. To me, like, we have long at Infrastructure Ontario published our data on our website. Every year we put out a track record report, and that's what we call it, a track record report. We've done them 3 years in a row with quantity surveyors putting it together for us. We give them our data, and we measure our on-time and on-budget performance. We lay out our methodology for determining on-time and on-budget. The one thing that I always regret is that we have nobody to compare ourselves to. Yeah. So you don't get better working in a vacuum. You get better by competition. You get better by looking at how you're doing relative to other approaches. All of our projects are P3 approaches, and every time I talk to somebody elsewhere in Ontario or in another government department in Ontario, they always say, oh yeah, I'm always on time and on budget. And then I say, show me your data. But they never produce their data. They'll tell me, yeah, I'm on time and I know it because I have my own data. Well, can I see your data? Do you put it on your website? There's no transparency. And there's no where there's no transparency, there's no comparability. And comparability, which is what helps you get better, you can learn from each other. You can say to yourself, I'm not as good as I think I am because I got data from elsewhere that was vetted by a quantity surveyor under the ICMS standards, and so I know it to be true. So I think if it gets imposed and brought down, and if I were you guys as an industry group, what I would do is I would start lobbying governments, and I would say, you guys are giving out big infrastructure grants all over the world. Infrastructure, there's a big push on. And don't you want to be able to measure the performance or the utility of the grants that you're giving out. And maybe every time you give out a grant to somebody, you should say, here's an agreement I'm signing with you, and you should say in this agreement, you have to report back to me on how your project did, and to do that, you have to use the ICMS standards. That is what I would do if I were you guys, and you know, it'll also benefit you because you'll get a lot more work too, and everybody will have to follow your standards in the future.
Rah, rah.
Okay, so now for the positive spin. We're starting to see, at least in BC, the start of 5D BIM models, and it was something Ken had mentioned. So 5D is the actual model itself plus the time, so it's linked to a schedule and the cost data. And at the moment, the client we're working with has no kind of methodology of how they want the costs tracked within the model. So the ICMS could provide a great system for the owner to be able to track his costs going forward. They're a large infrastructure client, so there's a lot of opportunity within the BIM world, I think.
For global companies, having no universal standard is extremely difficult. So imagine that each staff will have to be taught about using different standards, and this is inefficient, and expenditure is high on training. And also, this will be a learning curve all the time. On the other hand, if there are so many standards, in a project team, for example, quantity surveyors, project managers, architect, designers, and the client have different interpretations, any part in this world. And it's just inefficient because they don't talk one language. And so the use of the ICMS, if we adopt this will make efficient process, there is consistency, it will produce meaningful benchmark information, and construction professionals and our clients will not have to spend time in analyzing data from benchmark information because they talk one language anywhere in this world.
Right, you're going to finish up?
As Alan Hughes referred to earlier on, the vendors of software development are encouraged by ICMS. If we can encourage all our estimators and our data capture personnel to utilize ICMS coding up front and take the pain out of it, then the data capture will be automatic, and it will certainly be able to help us capture data in an orderly fashion and be able to analyze it a lot quicker. I think the challenges with all new systems is the inception. How do you implement it? And if you do some simple mapping, you'll be able to allocate your internal costing to an ICMS standard.
Thank you, Roy. So we've got about 14 and a half minutes left here, and what I thought I would open up the floor so we don't run out of time, because I'm sure somebody out there might have a question for our panel. And would I just like to come up to the microphone here in the middle and ask a question, or ask a question from your table, whatever you feel most comfortable with. Where I can't see. Oh, there you go. That's a very good question. Somebody want to answer that?
That sounds very similar to the master format in North America. From a general contractor's point of view, we're very well behaved. We'll do what we're told. I think, again, it needs to be driven by owners. We can manipulate our data in many ways, especially using current technology. We can set up our estimates and budgets in a whole different range of formats. But we'll do what kind of suits ourselves. So if the owner's asking for ICMS, we can set up like an ICMS. If the owner wants a unit price contract or a master format arrangement with 50 divisions, we can set up that way. So we at the moment, we'll do whatever we're told. And it all depends on the owner and what their need and what they want out of the end product.
I've recorded that as well. Contractors will do whatever they're told for future use. Roy.
Just to add to that, I think that Uniformat and all the other local systems, all national systems, will be able to integrate with ICMS because ICMS is an overlay system, so they are compatible.
Thank you. So, have any other questions?
Thank you. Justin Sullivan, RICS. So it's a question for John, really. You mentioned us lobbying to get the standard adopted. We're all of the coalition are for public benefit, so we don't have a political lobbying sort of arm to us. How would you recommend we go about asking governments to support ICMS?
It's a really good question.
I'm actually surprised, like, you guys don't do it now, because I can tell you the engineers, professional engineers of Ontario have an association, the architects of Ontario have an association, the who else? The Ontario General Contractors Association have an association, the Ontario Road Builders have an association, and they are regularly in to see us all the time asking for things that, you know, benefit them, and actually mostly benefit them and not us. And so you at least have something here that I think has some benefit for us, and while it might benefit you somewhat, probably has more benefit for us from that perspective. And so all you do is you pick up the phone and you say, I'd like to meet with you, and you just come on in and you tell us about your story and why you think it would be good, and you know, usually start at an assistant deputy minister level or something like that. And you know, it's you have to think about how you align your interests with what the government's interests are at the time. I mean, and some lobby groups don't even, they're absolutely brazen about it has no benefit for the government, and they try and dress it up, and really it just has interest, it has a benefit for them and nothing else. It's you know, it's not that complicated, so.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay,
Thank you. My name is John Gravel, and I'm with Bedrock Service here in Vancouver. I'd like to start off by saying thank you. This is exciting. The question is, this, while it's being presented as somewhat final, it's not. So what's the next step? What's the 3-year plan? What's the 5-year plan?
Anybody on the panel want to tackle that one? Okay. Oh.
It probably would be unfair to ask the panel to answer that question because we're just thinking about that. But what we're seriously thinking about is extending ICMS to cover life cycle costs as well as capital costs, because we think that's the natural next stage. Also, the number of civil engineering subsectors that were covered, we decided to limit that in the initial ICMS standards, so that could be extended as well. But I think thirdly, we always imagined it would be a dynamic standard for the marketplace, so there will be some degree of, it has been carefully put together and launched today, but there will be some degree of market feedback, which I'm sure will help us to shape and refine it when we come to publish the second edition, which hopefully will include life cycle costs and an extended civil engineering classification. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you very much.
I have a question maybe for John, if I can follow up on your good point about government and adoption. While I think all of the organizations in the coalition don't lobby in a political sense, we absolutely, I think, universally agree with your point that we want to work with government to get the right outcome in the public interest, and adoption of standards is, you know, perfectly fits within that. My question is, we have this coalition of 46 organizations that quite literally every market in the world. And I wonder if in your experience, you have had communication with your peers around the world that are doing your same role in other countries. And if not only were we to call up, you know, you and your peers around the world to ask the question about adoption of ICMS, but what would be your reaction, or what do you think your peers around the world's reaction would be to if we brought you all together and had more of a united effort, that, if you will, peer pressure to say, look, Canada is looking to adopt this. What are you doing in Australia? What are you doing in France, et cetera? What's your reaction to that?
I would think that they would probably respond more effectively to local pressure. So I would say if you brought in, you know, the 5 or 6 main quantity surveyors who work in Ontario all at once and say, we as an industry think you should adopt this, there would probably be some benefit in, I know Partnerships BC is here today, and so we talk a lot to Partnerships BC. It would be good if we could say Partnerships BC has adopted this standard. Our colleagues in Quebec or Alberta, wherever, have adopted this standard. I think they're going to care less about if you say something like the European Union adopted this. That's probably not going to be as effective. But I think you have enough strong people within Ontario, alone or within Canada, that could, if they formed a coalition, would be able to have an impact on the government.
So at the moment, all the discussions are revolved around government bodies adopting this. There's also obviously global developers as well. And as the QSs in the room are selling their services for those initial concept budgets, this should be a service you're selling, especially for the large global consultants, that we can help you benchmark your project in Shanghai to your project in Vancouver to your project in Paris or wherever the case it may be, and help you with that. And this would be a great upsell for the non-government construction projects.
I just had one other thought. You know, I studied enough accounting in university that I know there's something called generally accepted accounting principles. I know that, you know, when you read a balance sheet, it's pretty well the same wherever you go. When you read an income statement, it's pretty well the same wherever you go. You know, and so are these generally accepted accounting principles or international accounting standards. You know, the question becomes, why wouldn't we have or construction standards that have generally accepted accounting principles or whatever, the same? It just seems so obvious to me. I don't know, how else are you going to compare? Like when you're an investor making decisions around the world, you have access to that information from a financial perspective. Why wouldn't you have it from a construction perspective?
Very good.
Thank you. Pascal Asselin from France. I'm a trustee of ICMS. For us, ICMS is the right target for the next 10 or 16 years. But currently, when you are, for example, an owner or an investor comes to Qatar, take a designer from Switzerland, German part of Switzerland, take a cost manager from UK, and build this building in France with general contractor, subcontractors. How can we do to avoid several times the cost analysis and also the cost control?
Okay.
Because currently it's very difficult to impose because of your strong cultural method, ICMS process currently.
No, I agree with you 100%.
Okay, so I think I've got a very similar, where PCL is currently just wrapping up construction of an office tower downtown. It's being funded by the bank Credit Suisse, so from Switzerland, with a German architect. And it'll probably take a few people out of a job, but the owner got around that problem by having the local cost consultant do a budget and PCL doing a budget, and we met in the middle. If the ICMS was in effect, the owner would have that treasure trove of information that they kind of know how the price per square foot for a similar building from somewhere else, and everything's measured the same way, and they'd have a much better idea that the budget was acceptable or not, as the case may be.
So Gareth, who was right, you or the QS?
All right, I think we've got time for one more question. Anybody would like that privilege? Yes?
Hi, I'm Creighton, Chair of the BEAM Technical Committee. Just like to ask the question, if you adopt the ICMS, what happens now to the NRM1 which is produced by the RICS, would there be some kind of conflict in any way?
That's a great question. If you've got a copy of NRM1, then you can probably throw it away because it's going to change. So NRM1 is elemental, ICMS is not elemental, so it's quite a big change for QSs. So from a local standard point of view, your standard method of measurement, which is your trade measurement, so we have SMM7, NRM2, AIQS, have a form, NZQS do as well. That's not going to be affected. But if you have a higher cost planning standard, such as NRM1, then that will change. We think from an RICS perspective, it's about a year away before we'll issue that global statement.
Okay. So we've got like 2 minutes left, and if we want to stay on time here, I think what we should do is congratulate our panel. They've done a wonderful job. And I would like to thank all of you for coming out this afternoon. This is a great turnout and obviously a very interesting subject. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your afternoon and this evening's events.